At 68, she was kicked out, so she bought a $1 river office. But her dog knew what was hidden inside. The suitcase was already by the door when Marlene woke up. No shouting, no explanation she could hold on to. Just a quiet house that didn't feel like hers anymore. Before sunrise, she clipped the leash onto her German shepherd and walked out into the cold. By afternoon, she had spent her last dollar on a place no one wanted, an abandoned riverboat office, where something had been waiting longer than she had. Would you have walked away, or opened that door and stayed? The house was still. That was the first thing Marlene noticed when she opened her eyes. No hum from the coffee maker in the kitchen. No soft shuffle of footsteps upstairs. No television murmuring from the living room where her daughter-in-law usually fell asleep with it on. Just silence. A heavy kind. The kind that sits in the corners and doesn't move. Marlene lay still for a moment, staring at the faint line of light under her bedroom door. It wasn't quite morning yet. The sky outside the window held that dim, bluish-gray color that came just before sunrise. Rex was already awake. He was sitting at the foot of her bed, back straight, ears forward, watching the door. He didn't usually sit like that. "Hey," she whispered, her voice dry from sleep. "What is it?" His tail didn't wag. He just glanced at her, then back at the door again. Marlene pushed herself up slowly, the familiar stiffness in her knees greeting her before her feet even touched the floor. She reached for the cardigan draped over the chair, pulling it around her shoulders as she stood. The hallway felt colder than it should have. She opened the door. And there it was. A suitcase. Set neatly beside the front door, just inside the entryway. Upright, zipped, waiting. For a moment, Marlene didn't move. The house stayed quiet around her, as if it were holding its breath. Rex stepped out beside her, his nails clicking softly against the hardwood floor. He walked ahead, slow and cautious, stopping a few feet from the suitcase. His nose lifted, catching a scent that didn't belong to him. Marlene followed. She didn't rush. There was no sudden realization, no sharp intake of breath, just a slow, steady understanding settling into place. Something had already been decided. The note was folded on top of the suitcase, plain paper, torn from a notebook. She picked it up. Her hands were steady. "Mom," it began. She didn't read the rest right away. Her eyes drifted toward the stairs, expecting, maybe, to hear someone coming down. A creak. A voice. Anything. Nothing. The house stayed silent. Rex shifted his weight, glancing back toward the hallway, then up at her. His ears lowered slightly now, just enough to show he felt it too. Something had changed. Marlene looked back at the note. "It's time," it said. "We think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay. This has been hard for everyone." No anger in the words, no accusation, just distance. She read it twice, not because she didn't understand it the first time, but because something in her expected the meaning to shift, to soften. It didn't. She folded the paper carefully along its crease and set it back on the suitcase. Rex moved closer to her side, pressed his shoulder lightly against her leg. She rested her hand on his head. For a long moment, they stood there together, in the quiet, in the space that had already decided they didn't belong anymore. Marlene turned toward the kitchen. She didn't open the cabinets, didn't reach for a cup. She just stood there for a second, looking at the sink, the counters, the small things that had filled her days over the past year. Washing dishes, wiping surfaces, keeping busy in a house that was never really hers. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. It was faint, almost nothing. but it was enough. Marlene stepped back into the entryway. She picked up the suitcase. It was heavier than she expected, or maybe she just wasn't as strong as she used to be. She adjusted her grip, pulling the handle up with a quiet click. Rex watched her closely now. "Come on," she said softly. Her voice didn't break. She reached for the hook by the door and took down his leash. The leather was worn smooth from years of use, the handle shaped to her grip. She clipped it onto his collar, the metal clasp making a small, familiar sound. That was the loudest thing in the house. Rex looked at the door, then back at her. He didn't pull, didn't resist. He just waited. Marlene opened the door. Cold air slipped inside immediately, brushing against her face, her hands. It smelled faintly of damp pavement and distant trees. The sky outside was still dim, the streetlights casting long shadows across the quiet suburban road. No cars, no movement, curtains drawn in every window. Good. She stepped out. The door closed behind her with a soft, final sound. She didn't turn around. Rex did. He paused at the edge of the porch, his body angled toward the street, but his head turned back toward the house. His ears lifted, then lowered again. His eyes lingered on the door as if he expected it to open. Marlene stood still beside him, her hand resting lightly on the suitcase handle. "Let's go," she said. He didn't move right away. He looked at her. Really looked. Then, slowly, he turned forward. They walked down the short path to the sidewalk. The gravel shifted under her shoes, the wheels of the suitcase catching for a second before rolling smoothly again. The neighborhood stretched out in front of them, quiet and unchanged. The same houses, the same trimmed lawns, the same place she had arrived at months ago with a different kind of hope. Now it felt smaller, further away. Rex kept glancing back as they walked. Not every step, just enough to notice. His head turning slightly, checking, as if trying to understand why they weren't going back. Marlene didn't look. She kept her eyes forward. The sky began to lighten, just a little, as they reached the end of the street, a pale line of morning forming at the horizon. Her breath came out in soft clouds. The suitcase rolled beside her, and the house behind them grew smaller with every step. Rex looked back one last time, then he stopped. Not pulling, not resisting, just stopping. Marlene paused. She turned her head slightly, not enough to see the house, just enough to feel its presence behind her. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Rex stepped forward again, and this time he didn't look back. They walked on, into a morning that hadn't decided what it would be yet. And for the first time, Marlene realized she didn't know either. They kept walking. The sky slowly shifted from gray to a thin, pale blue, the kind that never quite warmed the air. Rex stayed close to her side now, no longer looking back, his steps steady, matching hers without needing the leash. At the corner, Marlene stopped. There was a bus stop bench there, metal, cold. A thin layer of frost clung to the edges. She set the suitcase down and sat. The quiet of the neighborhood felt different now, not peaceful, just empty. Rex sat beside her, leaning slightly into her leg. His body was warm through the fabric of her coat. She rested her hand on his back, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breathing. A car passed once, then nothing again. Marlene reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the folded note. She didn't read it this time, just held it for a second, then slipped it back. The bus came 20 minutes later. It was nearly empty. The driver didn't ask questions, just nodded when she dropped her coins into the box. Rex stepped up beside her without hesitation, his nails tapping lightly against the rubber floor. A few seats back, someone shifted to give them space. Marlene sat near the window. The suitcase rested against her knees. Rex curled at her feet, though his head stayed up, watching the aisle, alert in that quiet, steady way of his. The bus pulled away. The house, her son's house, slipped out of view without ceremony. She didn't turn to look. By mid-morning, the air had warmed slightly, but not enough to soften the chill that seemed to stay inside her. The public library opened at 9. Marlene had been there before, a handful of times over the past year, mostly to sit. Sometimes to read the newspaper, once or twice to use the computer when she needed to look something up. Today, she stayed. Rex lay beside her chair, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed but never fully asleep. The hum of the building was soft, pages turning, a printer clicking somewhere in the distance, the faint smell of paper and carpet cleaner. Marlene sat in front of the computer. The screen glowed pale in front of her. She didn't type right away. Her hands rested in her lap, fingers loosely folded, as if she were waiting for something to tell her what to do next. Nothing came. So she leaned forward, slowly, and began. Rooms for rent. The words felt small. The results came up quickly. Listings stacked one after another. Small apartments, shared spaces, requirements, deposits. No pets, no large dogs, no exceptions. She scrolled. Rex shifted at her feet, lifting his head slightly as if sensing the change in her breathing. "It's okay," she murmured, though she wasn't sure if she meant him or herself. She clicked another listing. Too expensive. Another. Too far. Another. No pets. She leaned back in the chair. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. A woman at the front desk coughed. Someone whispered across the room. Normal sounds. Ordinary. Marlene stared at the screen, then leaned forward again. This time, she typed something different. Cheap property. The words felt heavier, more final. The results loaded slower. County listings, auctions, tax foreclosures, pages that looked older, less polished, fewer photos, more warnings. Rex stood up. Not suddenly. Just stood. He stretched once, then stepped closer to her chair, his nose brushing lightly against her elbow. Marlene glanced down. "What is it?" she asked softly. His ears tilted forward. Not toward her, toward the screen. She followed his gaze. It didn't make sense, not really, but she looked anyway. And there it was. Halfway down the page. A small listing. One image. Faded. The structure in the photo leaned slightly to one side, its wood darkened by years of weather. The roof sagged in the middle. Two narrow windows faced a wide stretch of water that looked dull and unmoving. Below the image, the description was simple. Former Riverboat office. Abandoned. No utilities. County clearance required. Price $1. Marlene didn't move. The words settled slowly. $1. She leaned closer. The screen reflected faintly in her glasses. Remote bluff near the Ohio River, the listing continued. Access limited. Structure scheduled for demolition pending clearance. Rex let out a low breath. Not a growl, not a whine, just air. Marlene clicked the image, It expanded slightly, though the quality didn't improve. The edges blurred, but the shape of the place held steady. There was something about it. She couldn't name it. Didn't try to. Her fingers hovered over the mouse. The library felt quieter now. Or maybe it was just her. Rex stepped closer still, his shoulder brushing her knee. His eyes were fixed on the screen. Marlene noticed that. The way his posture had changed. Alert. Interested. Not anxious. Not uncertain. Just focused. She exhaled slowly. "It's nothing," she said, though the words felt thin. But she didn't close the page. Instead, she read it again. And then again. The details didn't change. Still abandoned. Still falling apart. Still worth almost nothing. But it stayed on the screen. Longer than anything else had. Marlene leaned back in the chair. Her hand rested absently on Rex's head. He didn't move. Neither did she. Outside, the light had shifted again, the day settling into its slow rhythm. Inside, the computer screen waited, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she didn't look away. The image stayed on the screen. Small, faded, crooked. But it held her attention in a way nothing else had all morning. Marlene leaned forward again, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the keyboard. She clicked through the listing, reading every line, even the ones that said nothing new. Abandoned. Condemned. No utilities. The words should have pushed her away. They didn't. Rex shifted beside her, his body now fully upright. He stood close enough that she could feel the warmth of him through her coat. His head angled toward the screen again, ears forward, as if he were listening to something she couldn't hear. Marlene reached down and ran her hand along his neck. "You see it too?" she murmured. He didn't move, just stayed there. Watching. By early afternoon, the decision had already been made. Not all at once, not in a single clear moment. It came in pieces, a phone number written down on a scrap of paper. A quiet conversation at the front desk. A clerk pointing her toward a county office a few towns over. By the time Marlene stepped back outside, the sky had shifted into that pale winter brightness that carried no warmth with it. Rex walked beside her, steady as always. They caught another bus. This one ran longer. Out past the edge of town, past rows of small houses that slowly gave way to open stretches of land. Fields lying flat and brown under the cold sky. Trees stripped bare, their branches reaching up like thin fingers against the light. Marlene sat by the window again, the suitcase between her knees, Rex at her feet. The ride was quiet, the kind of quiet that let thoughts settle without interruption. She didn't try to stop them, didn't try to organize them either. She just watched the landscape change. Let it happen. The county office was smaller than she expected, a low building with a faded sign out front and a gravel parking lot that looked half-used. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and old coffee. A man behind the counter looked up as she entered. Mid-40s, maybe. Thin. Tired eyes, but not unkind. "You hear about a listing?" he asked. Marlene nodded. "The River office," she said. He paused. Just for a second. Then leaned back slightly in his chair. "Most folks don't ask about that one," he said. "I figured," she replied. He studied her for a moment, then glanced down at Rex. The dog stood quietly at her side, alert but calm, his posture relaxed but ready. "Well," the man said, reaching for a folder behind the counter. Name's Eli. Eli Garner. Marlene, she said. He nodded, flipping the folder open. You've seen the photos? Yes. You understand what it is? She hesitated. An old building, she said, left alone too long. Eli let out a small breath, almost a half laugh. That's one way to put it. He turned the folder so she could see. More photos. Closer this time. The wood looked worse up close, warped, darkened, the roof sagging deeper than it had seemed on the screen. The road out there hasn't been maintained in years, Eli continued. No power, no running water. No inspection's been done on the structure in decades. Marlene looked at the images, didn't flinch. And it's still standing, she said. Eli looked at her again. Something in his expression shifted. Barely, he replied. A pause settled between them. Rex shifted his weight slightly, his eyes moving between Eli and Marlene, reading the space the way he always did. You planning to live there? Eli asked. Marlene didn't answer right away. She looked at the photos again. The building, the bluff, the river stretching out behind it. Then she nodded. I need somewhere to go. Eli leaned back again, ran a hand along the back of his neck. That place is quiet, he said. Real quiet. Not the kind most people are used to. Marlene gave a small nod. I'm not most people, she said. Another pause. Longer this time. Then Eli closed the folder. All right, he said. There's a county truck heading out that way this afternoon. I can take you as far as the turnoff. Marlene blinked once. That was faster than she expected. Thank you, she said. He shrugged slightly. Don't thank me yet. The truck ride was rough. Gravel under the tires, dust rising behind them in a long, thin trail. The road narrowed as they went, twisting through stretches of tall grass and scattered trees that leaned with the wind. Rex sat upright in the back seat beside Marlene, his body angled toward the window. His nose moved constantly, catching scents carried in through the cracks. Eli drove without much conversation. Every now and then he'd point. Used to be a farm out there. Road washes out sometimes past this bend. Small things, practical things. The kind that told you what you needed to know without saying too much. Eventually, the road dipped, then curved. And then the trees opened. The river came into view. Wide, brown, slow-moving but constant, like it had been there long before anything else and would stay long after. The bluff rose just ahead, and at the top of it, the building. Marlene leaned forward slightly, her hand resting against the seat in front of her. It looked smaller in person, but heavier, like it carried something the photos hadn't shown. The wood was darker than she expected, almost the color of old tobacco. The roof sagged in the middle. One shutter hung loose, tapping faintly in the wind. Eli slowed the truck. That's it, he said. He pulled to a stop near the edge of the clearing. For a moment, no one moved. The engine idled. Rex stood, not jumping, not rushing, just standing. His ears lifted, his body stilled. Marlene opened the door. Cold air rushed in. Stronger here. Sharper. She stepped out. The ground beneath her boots felt uneven, the grass tall and dry, brushing against her legs as she walked a few steps forward. Rex followed immediately, staying close but slightly ahead, his head low now, his focus shifting from the building to the ground and back again. Eli stepped out on the other side. If you want the key, he said, it's yours. Marlene didn't turn. She kept her eyes on the building, on the way it leaned, on the way it stood, on the way it didn't feel empty. Rex moved ahead of her now. Slow. Measured. Each step placed carefully. He reached the edge of the porch and stopped, looked back at her, then at the door. Waiting. Marlene stepped forward. The boards creaked under her weight. The sound echoed more than it should have. Eli held out the key behind her. She took it. Cold metal. Worn smooth. She stood in front of the door. For a second, her hand hovered near the lock. Rex stood beside her, still and quiet, his body aligned with hers. The wind moved through the trees behind them. The river shifted below, and the building waited. Marlene slid the key into the lock. It turned. The door gave with a slow, reluctant creak. Cold air slipped out from inside, carrying the smell of damp wood, dust, and something older, something that had been sitting untouched for a long time. Not rotten, just settled. Marlene pushed the door open wider. Light from the pale afternoon sky stretched across the floor in thin strips, cutting through the dimness. The boards inside were wide and worn smooth in places, gray with age. Dust rose in soft clouds under her first step. Rex moved past her without hesitation. Not rushing, not excited. Focused. His paws made almost no sound as he stepped inside, nose already working, mapping the space. He moved in a slow circle, head low, pausing at corners, at walls, at the legs of an old desk that stood near the far side of the room. Marlene stayed near the doorway for a moment, letting her eyes adjust, letting the space settle around her. It was bigger than it had looked from outside. One long room, mostly empty except for what had been left behind, an old wooden desk, a chair tipped slightly to one side, a rusted iron stove in the corner. The windows facing the river were clouded, their glass dimmed by years of dirt and weather. The place didn't feel broken. It felt paused, like someone had stepped out and never come back. "You weren't kidding," Eli said quietly from behind her. Marlene glanced back. He stood at the threshold, hands in his jacket pockets, taking it in with a kind of distant familiarity. "Seen a few like this," he added, "but this one's held up better than most." Marlene nodded faintly. She stepped further inside. The floor creaked under her weight, the sound echoing slightly through the open space. Each step stirred more dust, each movement revealing the slow passage of time that had settled here without interruption. Rex had stopped near the back wall now. He stood there, still again, his body angled toward a section of wood paneling just behind the desk. His ears lifted slightly. His tail remained still. Marlene noticed, but she didn't go to him. Not yet. She turned instead, looking toward the windows. Beyond them, the river stretched wide and slow, its surface dull under the winter sky. The current moved steadily, almost silently, the kind of motion you felt more than heard. It filled the space. Not loudly, but completely. "You'll need supplies," Eli said, stepping inside now. His boots pressed heavier into the floorboards. "Water. Heat, if you can manage it. Nights get colder out here than they do in town." Marlene nodded again. "I've managed colder," she said. He studied her for a second, then nodded back. "I'll leave you to it," he said. "There's a general store about 10 miles back the way we came. Owner's name is Harris. Doesn't ask many questions." He paused at the door. "If you change your mind, no one will blame you." Marlene didn't answer. She just stood there, looking at the river through the dirty glass. After a moment, the truck engine outside started again. The sound faded slowly as Eli drove off. Then there was nothing, just the river, and the wind brushing lightly against the sides of the building. The first night came faster than she expected. Light drained out of the sky in long, quiet minutes, leaving the room dim before she was ready for it. Marlene worked without thinking too much. She moved the chair upright, cleared a space near the wall, spread out what little she had: blankets, a small bag of clothes, a thermos with what was left of the day's coffee. Rex stayed close, closer than usual. He followed her movements, not underfoot, but always within reach. When she stopped, he stopped. When she turned, he turned. At one point, he walked back to that same spot behind the desk. Paused, looked at the wall, and returned to her. Marlene noticed again, but the cold was settling in, and her hands were stiff. There would be time for questions later. For now, there was survival. The nights were the hardest. Cold seeped in through every crack, every seam in the old wood. Even layered in blankets, Marlene could feel it settling into her bones. Sleep came in pieces, short stretches broken by the sound of the wind, the shifting of the building, the steady, low presence of the river. Rex didn't sleep deeply. He lay near her, but his head lifted often, ears catching sounds she couldn't hear. Once or twice he stood and walked the room in slow, quiet loops before settling again. The second night, Marlene woke to find him standing at the same wall. Still. Watching. Not tense. Just present. She pushed herself up on one elbow. "Rex," she whispered. He didn't move. Didn't look at her. His focus stayed fixed. Marlene watched him for a few seconds, then lay back down. The cold pressed in again. Sleep took her before the question could settle. Days blurred into each other. Marlene found a rhythm. It wasn't easy, but it was something. She made trips back toward the main road when she could, carrying water in plastic containers, buying small supplies from the store Eli had mentioned. The owner barely spoke, just nodded when she came in, rang up what she needed, and let her be on her way. Back at the office, she worked, boarding up one of the windows with scrap wood she found nearby, clearing debris from the floor, checking the stove, though she hadn't yet figured out how to make it work properly. Her hands stayed busy. Her thoughts stayed quieter that way. Rex adapted faster than she did. He learned the edges of the clearing, the sounds of the wind through the trees, the rhythm of the river. But he never forgot the wall. Every day, at least once, he returned to it. Stood there, nose close to the wood. Sometimes he would press it lightly, inhaling, then step back and look at Marlene. Waiting. Always waiting. By the end of the first week, she couldn't ignore it anymore. It wasn't random. It wasn't habit. It was intention. And Rex wasn't the kind of dog to insist on something without reason. Marlene stood across the room one afternoon, watching him. The light from the window fell across his back, outlining his shape in a pale glow. His ears were forward, his body still. The same spot. Again. She crossed the room slowly, each step measured. Rex didn't move when she approached. He just shifted slightly to give her space. Marlene reached out, ran her fingers along the wood. It felt old, dry. But beneath it, something different. She paused, her hand resting there, then pulled it back. Not yet. The sun was already dropping toward the horizon. The cold would come again soon. There were other things to finish. She looked down at Rex. He looked up at her. Neither of them moved. For a moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, like it was holding something just out of reach. Marlene stepped back. "Tomorrow," she said softly. Rex didn't respond. But he didn't return to the wall either. He followed her instead. And for the rest of the evening, he stayed close. Closer than before, as if whatever he had been waiting for was finally starting to matter. Morning came slower than usual. The cold had settled deep into the building overnight, and even after the pale light began to slip through the windows, the air inside stayed heavy and still. Marlene sat on the edge of her makeshift bed, pulling her coat tighter around her shoulders, her breath faintly visible in the dim light. Rex was already up. He stood near the door at first, listening. Then he turned, not toward her, toward the desk. Marlene watched him. He didn't rush, didn't dart across the room like a dog chasing something unseen. He walked with purpose. Step by step. Straight to the same place. Behind the desk. He stopped there again. Head lowered, ears forward. Still. Marlene rubbed her hands together, trying to warm them. "You're back at it," she murmured. Rex didn't move, didn't even glance at her this time. That was new. Before, he had always checked in, looked back, waited for her attention. Now he stayed fixed, as if whatever he had found was no longer a question. It was an answer. She tried to ignore it. At first, there were other things to do. Water to bring in. Wood to gather. A small tear in the wall she had been meaning to patch. But even as she moved through the space, her attention kept drifting. Back to him, back to that spot. Rex didn't leave it for long. He would step away only when she did. Follow her across the room. Stay close while she worked. Then, as soon as she paused, he returned. Each time the same. Stand. Wait. Nose close to the wood. One paw lifting slightly, then resting again. Not scratching, not digging, just pressing. Like he was asking. By midday, the light had shifted enough to brighten the back wall. Dust floated in the air, visible now in the thin beams that cut across the room. Marlene stood near the stove, holding a dented tin cup between her hands. The coffee inside had gone lukewarm, but she drank it anyway. Rex hadn't moved. He stood at the wall again. And this time, he didn't just wait. He stepped sideways, then forward, then back, blocking her line of sight as she moved. Marlene frowned slightly. "What are you doing?" she asked. Rex turned his head, looked at her. Not confused, not uncertain, intent. Then he stepped back to the wall and pressed his nose against it again. Once, firm, then he pawed at the wood. A single, deliberate motion. Not frantic, not playful. One scratch. And then he stopped. He looked at her again. Waiting. Marlene didn't move right away. She set the cup down slowly. Her eyes shifted from Rex to the wall, then back again. "You've been doing this for days," she said quietly. Rex's tail moved once, low, controlled. He stepped aside just enough to give her space, but he didn't leave. The room felt different now. Quieter, tighter somehow. Marlene walked toward the desk, each step slow, measured. The boards creaked beneath her, the the sound echoing more than it should have in the still air. She stopped beside Rex. The wall in front of them looked no different than it had before. Same wood, same worn surface, same age. But now that she was standing here, it didn't feel the same. She reached out, ran her fingers along the paneling. The wood was rough in places, smooth in others. Years of wear and weather pressed into every inch. She pressed lightly. Nothing. She moved her hand higher, then lower. Her fingers paused. There. A slight give. Not much. Just enough. Marlene frowned. She pressed again. This time harder. The wood shifted. Barely. But it shifted. Rex leaned forward, his nose brushing her wrist, his breath warm against her skin. He didn't push, didn't rush her. He just stayed close. Present. Certain. Marlene pulled her hand back, looked at the wall again. "You've been trying to tell me something," she said. Her voice was softer now, less uncertain. Rex's ears flicked slightly. He stepped back half a pace, giving her more room. She looked around the room. There wasn't much to work with. The desk, the chair, a few scattered tools she had brought with her. She crossed to the corner, picked up a small pry bar she had used earlier to pull loose a warped board near the window. The metal felt cold in her hand. She turned back. Rex had already returned to the spot, standing, waiting. Marlene approached slowly. Her heart was beating faster now. Not from fear, from something else. Something she hadn't felt in a while. Curiosity. Real curiosity. She slid the edge of the pry bar into the narrow seam between two boards. It resisted at first. The wood held firm. Old, dry. Unwilling to move. Marlene adjusted her grip, pressed harder. The metal creaked. Then, a soft crack. Not loud, but clear. Rex's body tensed slightly, then stilled again. Marlene paused, listened. Nothing else moved. No sound from outside. No shift in the building. Just the faint echo of that crack settling into the silence. She pressed again, lowly, carefully. The board gave a little more this time, just enough to create a gap. A thin line of darkness behind it. Marlene leaned closer. Her breath caught slightly. Rex stepped forward again, his nose lowering toward the opening, his body calm now, no tension, no urgency. As if this was exactly where he had meant to lead her. Marlene pulled the pry bar free. Her hand hovered near the loosened wood. She didn't pull it away yet. She just stood there, looking, feeling the shift in the room, the way the air seemed to settle differently, like something long hidden had just exhaled. Rex sat down beside her. For the first time since he had started this, he relaxed. Not completely, but enough. His job, whatever it had been, was almost done. Marlene rested her fingers against the edge of the board. The gap was wider now. Dark still. Waiting. She took a slow breath and prepared to pull. The wood resisted at first. Not much. Just enough to remind her it had been in place for a long time. Marlene tightened her grip, fingers pressing into the rough grain, and pulled again. This time, it gave. The board shifted outward with a dry, splintering sound, releasing a faint cloud of dust that drifted into the air between her and the wall. She coughed once, turning her face slightly, then looked back. The opening was small. No bigger than the width of her hand at first. Dark inside. Still. Rex leaned forward, his nose hovering just at the edge of the gap. He didn't push in, didn't force anything. He just breathed it in, slow and steady. Marlene set the loosened board aside and widened the opening, easing another section free. The wood came away more easily now, as if whatever had been holding it had already let go. Behind it, a narrow space, built into the wall. Carefully. Not accidental, not damage. A compartment. Marlene stared at it for a moment, her hand resting lightly against the exposed frame. "Well," she whispered. The word didn't carry far. The room held it close. She leaned closer. The smell inside was different from the rest of the building. Less damp. More contained. Like whatever had been placed there had been protected, on purpose. Her fingers reached in slowly. Carefully. She brushed against something soft. Cloth. Wrapped. Marlene paused, then slid her hand further in and lifted it out. A bundle, roughly folded, light enough to hold easily but solid enough to carry weight. She stepped back slightly, giving herself space, and set it down on the desk. Dust shifted again as it touched the surface. Rex stepped around her, moving to the other side of the desk, his eyes fixed on the bundle now. His posture had changed again, no longer searching, no longer waiting. Watching. Marlene unfolded the cloth. The fabric was worn, edges frayed, but it had done its job. Whatever it had wrapped had stayed protected. Inside, a book. Leather-bound. Dark brown, the surface cracked slightly with age but still intact. The spine was firm, the corners worn smooth by time. Marlene ran her fingers along the cover. No title, no marking. Just the feel of it. Heavy. Real. She lifted it carefully. The weight settled into her hands in a way that felt deliberate, like it had been meant to be held again. Rex shifted closer, his nose lifting toward it, but he didn't touch. He just stood there. Calm. Present. Marlene opened the book. The first page creaked slightly as it moved, the sound sharp in the quiet room. The paper inside was yellowed with age, the edges softened, but the writing was clear. Dark ink. Steady lines. She leaned closer. Dates. Entries. Names. Each line written with care, with consistency, as if whoever had written it had done so over a long period of time. Marlene turned another page, and another. The pattern continued. Records, detailed, precise but not cold, not just numbers or notes. There was something else there, something human. Rex sat down beside the desk. For the first time since they had entered the building, he lowered his head slightly, resting it just above his paws. His ears relaxed, though they still caught every small sound in the room. Marlene noticed. "You knew," she said quietly. He didn't respond. Didn't need to. She turned back to the compartment. There was more inside. She reached in again. This time her fingers brushed against something smaller. Hard. She pulled it out. A tin. Simple. Worn at the edges. She set it beside the book. For a moment, she didn't open it. She just looked at it. Then back at the book. Then at Rex. The room felt different now. Not empty. Not forgotten. Occupied. by something that had been waiting. Marlene exhaled slowly. Her shoulders dropped, just a little, as if some tension she hadn't noticed had begun to ease. She picked up the book again, turned another page. The sound of paper moving filled the room. Soft. Steady. Outside, the river continued its slow path, unseen but present, its low movement pressing gently against the silence. Inside, the space held. The light shifted, and something that had been hidden for years was no longer alone. Rex let out a quiet breath and settled fully onto the floor. No urgency, no restlessness, just stillness. His work was done, and Marlene stood at the edge of something she hadn't expected to find. Something that felt, not like a discovery, but like an arrival. Marlene didn't move for a while. She stood beside the desk, the book still open in her hands, the pages catching the thin afternoon light that filtered through the dusty windows. The air in the room had settled again, but it felt different now, not empty. Full. Quiet, but not hollow. Rex lay beside the desk, his breathing slow and steady. His eyes were half closed, but not asleep. He was aware. Watching without watching. Marlene turned another page. The writing stayed the same. Careful. Measured. Each entry placed with intention, as if the person who had written it had known someone might read it one day. The dates stretched back years, decades. She ran her finger along one line. March 14th, water high, current steady. Boat passed just before sunrise. Man on deck looked tired. Gave him coffee. Marlene paused. She read it again. Not just a record. A moment. Small, but held. She turned the page. April 2nd. Fog thick. Could barely see the bank. Waited longer than usual. No one rushed. That was good. Another page. June 9th. Storm passed in the night. Dock held. One loose board. We'll fix tomorrow. The entries moved between the practical and the personal without effort. They weren't separated. They were the same thing. Work. Observation. Care. Marlene pulled the chair closer and sat down slowly. The wood creaked under her weight, but it held. She leaned forward, elbows resting lightly on the desk, the book open in front of her. The river moved outside. She could feel it. Not loud, but constant. She turned another page. This one different. The writing shifted slightly. Not in style, but in tone. August 21st. Man came through today. Said he didn't have anywhere else to go. Sat here for a while. Didn't talk much. Left before dark. Hope he finds something. Marlene blinked once. Her eyes stayed on the page. Rex lifted his head slightly, watching her now. She kept reading. September 3rd. Another quiet day. Coffee tasted stronger this morning. Might have added too much. No one complained. A faint breath escaped her. Not quite a laugh. Just something. She turned the page. October 11th. Cold came early this year. Built the fire before dawn. Felt right to have the place warm again. The words settled into her slowly. Not rushed, not forced. They didn't ask anything from her. They just existed. Marlene leaned back slightly in the chair. Her hands rested on either side of the book now. She looked around the room. At the stove in the corner. At the windows. At the floor beneath her feet. then back at the page. November 2nd. If someone finds this someday, I hope the place still stands. It's done more good than most buildings ever will. Marlene's fingers tightened slightly against the edge of the desk. She didn't turn the page right away. She just sat there, letting the words settle. Rex stood up. Not quickly, not urgently. He walked over to her side and rested his head lightly against her knee. She placed her hand on his neck without looking. "You knew there was something here," she said quietly. Rex didn't move, but his tail brushed once against the floor. Marlene looked back down at the book. Then slowly, she turned the page. The next entry was shorter, but it felt heavier. November 18th. Not many coming through now. River's changing. Or maybe it's the people. Hard to tell. Another. December 5th. Snow this morning. First one. Quiet. Almost too quiet. She swallowed. Her eyes moved more slowly now, reading each line as if it mattered more than the last. Then, she found it. Not at the end, but close. The handwriting stayed steady, but the space between the lines grew slightly wider, as if the writer had taken more time, or needed more of it. January 12th. If you're reading this, then you're here. That's something. Not everyone makes it to where they need to be. Some just keep moving. Marlene stopped. Her breath caught slightly. The room felt smaller again. Not closed in, but focused, like everything had drawn inward. Rex stayed still beside her, waiting. Not for her to move. Just there. Marlene leaned closer to the page, her eyes traced to the next line. If this place still stands, then it's done its job. It gave someone a place to stop. That's all it was ever meant to do. Her hand moved to the edge of the paper. She didn't turn the page yet. She just sat there, looking at the words, feeling something settle inside her. Not sudden, not overwhelming, just steady, like the river outside, constant, unrushed. She leaned back slowly. Her gaze moved across the room again. But this time, she saw it differently. Not broken, not abandoned, held, waiting. Rex shifted slightly, then lay back down beside her. His body relaxed now, completely. The tension that had been in him since they arrived, gone. Marlene rested her hand on the open page. Flat still. "You were right," she said softly. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. The room held them, the same way it had held everything else. Marlene closed the book gently, not finished, just pausing. She looked toward the window. The light had begun to fade again, the sky shifting toward evening, the river still moving, always moving. And for the first time since she had stepped into this place, Marlene didn't feel like she was passing through it. She felt like she had stopped. The thought stayed with her long after the light faded. That night, the cold came again, pressing in through the walls and floor the same way it always did. But something about it felt different, less sharp, less intrusive. She sat near the desk, the logbook closed but within reach, her hand resting lightly on its cover. Rex lay beside her, fully at ease now. His body stretched out along the floor, one ear tilted toward the door, the other relaxed. He wasn't listening for something anymore. He was staying. Marlene watched him for a while. "You're not looking for it anymore," she said softly. Rex didn't move, didn't need to. She already knew. The next morning, she woke before the light came in. Not because of the cold, not because of the sounds outside, but because something inside her had shifted. She sat up slowly, pulling her coat around her shoulders, and looked toward the desk. The logbook was still there, exactly where she had left it. The room felt quieter, not empty, just settled. Rex lifted his head as she stood, his eyes following her without urgency. "Morning," she said. Her voice sounded different to her own ears. Steadier, she walked to the window, wiped a small section of glass clear with her sleeve. Outside, the river moved in that same slow, steady way, the surface catching the faint gray light of early morning. It didn't ask anything. It didn't change for her. It just continued. Marlene stood there for a moment, then turned. There was work to do. She started small. The desk. It had been the center of the room before. You could tell by the way everything else had been arranged around it. Even now, after all the years, it held its place. Marlene cleared it completely, lifted the chair, and set it properly in front of it. Wiped the surface down with a damp cloth she had brought from her supplies. The wood beneath the dust was darker than she expected. Still strong, still holding. Rex watched from his place near the door, not following her this time, just observing. As if he understood this part wasn't his, she moved to the floor next. Sweeping, slow, steady strokes. Dust gathered in small lines, then larger ones, then piles she could carry outside. Each pass revealed more of the original wood beneath. The room began to change. Not all at once, but enough to notice. Light moved differently across the floor now. The air felt clearer, easier to breathe. Marlene paused at one point, leaning on the broom, looking around. "You've been here a long time," she said quietly, though she wasn't sure who she was speaking to. The walls, the desk, the space itself. It didn't answer, but it didn't feel empty either. By midday, she had opened both windows. The hinges protested, but they moved. Fresh air pushed in, carrying the scent of the river, the damp earth below, the faint trace of something green beginning to return beneath the cold. Rex stood and walked to the opening. He lifted his head, letting the wind move through his fur. Then he turned and looked back at her. Not waiting, just sharing the moment. Marlene smiled. A small one. Barely there. But real. She returned to the desk, opened the logbook again. This time, not searching, not scanning, just reading. One entry, then another. Letting each one settle before moving on. The rhythm of it slowed her, matched the pace of the place. After a while, she closed it again. Carefully. Then reached into her bag, pulled out a small notebook. Plain, unused. She set it beside the old one, looked at both, then picked up a pen. She hesitated, just for a second, then wrote. The date. Today's date. Her handwriting wasn't as steady as the one in the logbook. Not yet. But it didn't need to be. She paused, then added a line. Cold morning, river steady, wind from the west. She stopped, looked at the words. Simple. Nothing special. But something about it felt right. Rex moved closer, rested his head against the side of the desk, watching her. Marlene glanced down at him. I guess we're starting, she said. He blinked slowly. calm, certain. The days that followed settled into something new. Not easy, but not uncertain either. Marlene kept working, repairing what she could, cleaning what she couldn't fix, finding small ways to make the space hold again. She learned how the light moved through the room at different times of day, where the floor stayed warmest when the sun hit it, where the wind came in strongest at night. Rex adjusted with her. He stopped returning to the wall, stopped checking the space behind the desk. Instead, he took up a place near the door during the day, watching the clearing, listening to the river. When she moved, he moved, but not out of concern, out of presence. One afternoon, Marlene sat at the desk again, her notebook open, pen resting in her hand. She looked at the old logbook, then at her own. The difference between them didn't feel as large as it had before. Not separate. Connected. She reached out and rested her hand lightly on the older book. "Guess you didn't expect company," she said quietly. The room held the words, the same way it held everything else. Marlene leaned back in the chair. Her eyes moved across the space, the cleaned floor, the open windows, the desk. Rex resting near the door, his body stretched out, completely at ease. Nothing about the place was finished, not even close. But it wasn't waiting anymore. It was becoming. And for the first time since she had stepped onto the porch with her suitcase, Marlene didn't feel like she was trying to find somewhere to stay. She felt like she was beginning to belong. The feeling didn't arrive all at once. It settled in slowly, like the way the morning light moved across the floor, first a thin line, then wider, until the whole room held it. Days passed, then weeks. The air changed just slightly, still cold, but softer around the edges. The ground outside began to lose its stiffness. The grass near the bluff shifted from dull brown to a faint, uneven green. Marlene noticed these things, not because she was looking for them, but because she was there to see them. The first visitor came on a quiet afternoon. Marlene had been outside, working near the side of the building, adjusting a loose board beneath one of the windows. Rex lay a few feet away, his head up, watching the clearing. He heard it before she did. His ears lifted, body still. Then he stood, not tense, just alert. Marlene paused, listening. At first, nothing. Then the distant sound of tires on gravel. Faint, uncertain, not coming fast. Whoever it was, they were moving carefully. Rex stepped forward, placing himself slightly ahead of her, his posture calm but ready. His tail stayed low, controlled. The sound grew closer. Then a truck came into view at the edge of the clearing. Older, faded paint. It rolled to a slow stop, the engine idling for a moment before shutting off. The door opened. A man stepped out. Late 60s, maybe older, worn jacket, hands that had seen years of work. He stood there for a second, looking at the building, then at Marlene, then at Rex. Rex didn't bark, didn't move forward. He just watched. The man raised a hand slightly. "Afternoon," he said. Marlene nodded. "Afternoon." He took a few steps closer, his boots pressing into the gravel. "I heard someone was out here," he said. "Didn't think it was true." Marlene glanced at the building behind her. "It is," she said. The man looked past her, toward the windows, then back at her again. "This place," he began, then stopped. His eyes shifted slightly. "You mind if I take a look?" Marlene hesitated. Not long, then stepped aside. Go ahead. Rex stayed where he was, watching closely as the man approached. Not blocking, but present. The man noticed, gave a small nod. Good dog, he said quietly. Rex didn't react. Inside, the man moved slowly, like he wasn't just seeing the place. He was remembering it. His eyes traced the walls, the floor, the desk. He stopped there, rested his hand lightly on the wood. Been a long time, he said. Marlene stayed near the door. Let him move. Let him take it in. After a while, he turned back to her. You find anything? He asked. Marlene paused, then nodded slightly. A logbook, she said. The man's expression shifted. Not surprised. But something close to it. Still here, he murmured. He stepped closer to the desk. Marlene opened it, turned a few pages. Let him see. His eyes moved over the writing. Careful. He stopped at one entry. His hand hovered above the page but didn't touch. That's him, he said quietly. That's my uncle. Marlene looked at the name. Didn't say anything. The man let out a small breath. I used to come here when I was a kid, he said. Sit right there. He pointed toward the corner near the window. Didn't understand half of what was going on. Just like the sound of the river. Rex had moved closer now, not intruding, just listening. The man glanced down at him. Guess he brought you here, he said. Marlene looked at Rex, then back at the man. Seems that way. The man nodded. After a while, he stepped back, looked around one more time. You're doing good work here, he said. Marlene didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, I'm just taking care of it. The man gave a small smile. That's all it ever needed. He turned and walked out. The truck started again a few minutes later. Then the sound faded. After that, more people came. Not many. One at a time. A fisherman who stopped by on his way downriver. A woman who said her father used to talk about the place. A younger man who had seen the building from the road and decided to take the turn just to see what was there. Each one stayed a little while, looked around, asked a few questions. Sometimes they sat. Sometimes they just stood in the doorway. Rex greeted each of them the same way. Calm, measured, never rushing forward, never pulling back. He stayed near Marlene, but always aware of the space. Watching. Allowing. Marlene didn't advertise, didn't invite. She just stayed. And somehow, that was enough. One afternoon, a teacher arrived with 2 students. They stood quietly inside, the children looking around with wide eyes, taking in the room, the desk, the windows that framed the slow-moving river. Marlene showed them the logbook. Let them turn a page. Carefully. The boy traced a line with his finger. Someone wrote this a long time ago, he said. Marlene nodded. They did. The girl looked up at her. And now you're here. Marlene paused, then nodded again. Yes, she said. Rex lay near the door, watching them still, content. That evening, after they had all gone, the room felt different again. Not quieter, but fuller. The sounds of the day lingered in small ways. The memory of voices, footsteps, the shifting of chairs. Marlene sat at the desk, her notebook open. She wrote the date, then paused. Her pen hovered above the page, then moved. Clear afternoon. Visitors stopped by, talked about the past. She stopped, looked at the words, then added, "Place doesn't feel empty anymore." She set the pen down. Rex stood and walked over to her, resting his head lightly against her arm. She placed her hand on his neck. "You knew," she said again. His tail moved once, slow, certain. Outside, the light faded. The river continued its steady path. Inside, the room held its shape, not abandoned, not forgotten, alive in a quiet, steady way. And Marlene sat in the center of it, not passing through, not searching, just there, where people had begun to return. The mornings came earlier now, not because the days were longer, though they were beginning to be, but because Marlene woke before the light, almost without thinking. It had become a habit. She would sit up slowly, pull her coat around her shoulders, and listen. The building no longer sounded unfamiliar. The creak of the boards, the soft push of wind against the siding, the steady, distant movement of the river below. None of it startled her anymore. It belonged. And so did she. That morning, the air felt different. Not warmer exactly, but softer. The kind of air that hinted at a change you couldn't quite see yet. Marlene stood and walked to the window. She wiped the glass with her sleeve, clearing the same small space she always did. The river moved below, unchanged, constant, but the light touching it had shifted. There was more of it now, more color. She stood there for a while. Rex moved to her side, not quickly, just quietly. He sat beside her, his body close, his eyes following hers out toward the water. He didn't check the door anymore, didn't watch the walls. He didn't search. He simply stayed. Marlene stepped outside. The ground beneath her boots felt firmer now, less brittle. The grass in the clearing had begun to fill in, softening the edges of the path leading up to the building. The porch boards creaked under her weight, but the sound felt familiar. Expected. She sat down on the top step. The wood was cool, but not biting. Rex settled beside her, his body angled slightly toward the open space, but his head turned toward her. Always both. Watching the world. Watching her. She didn't think about the house anymore. Not in the way she had at first. There had been a time, in those first days, when her mind would drift back without warning. The front door, the hallway, the sound of footsteps upstairs that never came. But that had faded, not erased. Just quieted. Replaced. By this. The river, the desk, the pages of the logbook, the sound of her own pen moving across paper each evening, the small moments that filled the space between sunrise and dark. She stood after a while and went back inside. The room greeted her the way it always did now, open, steady, holding. The desk stood where it had always been, but it looked different. Not because it had changed, because it was being used again. The logbook rested where she had left it, closed, protected. Beside it, her own notebook, less worn, but no longer empty. She pulled the chair out and sat. Opened her notebook, wrote the date, then paused. Her pen hovered above the page. She looked up, around the room, the windows, the stove, the walls that had held so much before she ever arrived. Then back down. She wrote slowly. Clear morning, river steady, light came early. She stopped. Let the words settle. Then added, "Still here." She leaned back. The chair creaked softly beneath her. Rex walked over and lay down beside the desk, his head resting against the floor, his eyes half closed. Content. Completely. Later that day, no one came. No truck. No footsteps on gravel. No voices at the door. The clearing stayed empty. But it didn't feel empty. Marlene moved through her day the same way she always did, checking the repairs she had made, straightening the small things that had shifted, standing at the window longer than she needed to, watching the river, listening. As the sun lowered, the light inside the room softened again. Long shadows stretched across the floor. The air cooled. Marlene stepped outside once more, sat on the porch, Rex beside her. The world moved in its quiet way. Wind through the trees. Water below. A distant sound she couldn't quite place, carried on the air and gone just as quickly. She rested her hands in her lap. Let the stillness settle. And then, without effort, the thought came. Not loud, not sudden, just clear. She hadn't been pushed out. Not really. She had been moved. Not by force, but by something quieter, something she hadn't understood at the time. The door had closed. Yes, but only because there had been another one waiting. Somewhere she hadn't known to look. Somewhere she wouldn't have chosen, unless she had no other choice. She looked out at the river, then back at the doorway behind her, at the room, at the place that had held itself together long enough for her to find it. Rex shifted beside her, pressing lightly against her leg. She rested her hand on his back. "You didn't let me miss it," she said. His tail moved once. Slow, certain. The light faded. The sky turned deeper. The river darkened but didn't disappear. It was still there. Always there. Marlene stood after a while and stepped back inside. She didn't rush. There was no need. The room waited. Not because it had to. Because it had always done that. For whoever needed it. She paused at the doorway, looked once more at the space, then stepped in. The floor creaked, the air settled, and the place held her, exactly where she was meant to be. Marlene stood there a moment longer, just inside the doorway, her hand resting lightly against the frame. The room didn't feel borrowed anymore. It didn't feel temporary. It felt returned. Not to something she had lost, but to something she hadn't known how to find. Her eyes drifted to the desk, to the logbook, to the chair where she now sat every morning without thinking about it, and then to Rex, lying quietly where he always chose to be, not watching the walls anymore. Not searching.
Just there, she talked about that first day, how she had working with nothing but a suitcase and a place she didn't want to look too rosy at. How she would live around that wall forever, never knowing what's said just behind it. Because people don't go looking inside things that seem finished, not unless something insists. Rex hadn't back, hadn't binded, hadn't magazines. He had just stayed, returned to same place again and again, until she finally listened. Marlene stepped forward, slow, steady, like she had learned to move here. She sat down at the desk, ran her hand across the wood, and for the brief second, she wondered how many people had passed through their lives the same way she almost had, standing just a few inches away from something meant for them, but never thinking to look twice. What if the only reason she found her was because something loyal refused to give up on it?